You don't have to be a genius to figure out how the box office works these days. First, people watch stuff on streaming, not in theaters, unless it's an event movie. Second, nobody cares about smart movies for actual grown-ups. And third, if you're spending hundreds of millions on a shitty movie, it just doesn't work like it used to. That's why we all saw these box office bombs coming a mile away, and I'm pretty sure the studios did too. Sometimes a movie can make a massive amount of money and still go down as a flop just because of its budget. Final Reckoning pulled in $591 million at the box office. Sounds huge, right? But here's the catch. The production cost ballooned to $400 million by the time it finally wrapped. There's delays from the pandemic, the writer's strike, and just about every problem you could imagine. So filming it took more than 2.5 years. Tom Cruise went all in too. He was everywhere doing more interviews and promo than ever before. Really made sure people knew this was his final ride as Ethan Hunt. The opening weekend looked strong. Best numbers in the franchise. 63 million domestic for 3 days, 77 over the 4-day Memorial Day frame. Cruise was hyped, called it the weekend for the history books, but for a movie with this kind of price tag, those numbers just don't add up. If you use the usual blockbuster math, a movie at this scale needs to make at least 2.5 times its budget just to break even. So you're looking at $800 million to $1 billion needed. No Mission Impossible film has ever gotten there. And Final Reckoning wasn't going to be the first. It finished way short, just under $600 million. Even after all the promo, it just couldn't dig itself out of the hole. Not a bad movie, honestly, but just too expensive for what it delivered. Paul Thomas Anderson has been around long enough that the industry basically trusts him to do what he wants, even if his movies almost never turn a profit. Out of his 9 previous films, only 2 actually made money in theaters. So when the budget for One Battle After Another came out, everybody was kind of shocked. It just didn't make sense, especially in a world where Nolan made Oppenheimer for $100. Why spend this much on an Anderson film, even with DiCaprio starring? From the start, we all kind of knew it would flop. The movie needed to pull in around $435 million just to get out of the red, and that was always going to be a long shot. In the end, it managed $203 million worldwide. That's not nothing, but it's nowhere close to what Warner Brothers needed, especially now with the studio on the block for a Netflix buyout. You have to wonder what they were thinking, throwing money at movies where everyone saw the financial crash coming. Thing is, One Battle After Another has been a massive hit with critics and award shows. 9 Golden Globe nominations, constant Oscar buzz, and it's pretty much a lock for Best Picture after all the recent hype. Even Spielberg called it a really incredible movie. So there's that, I guess. Just like One Battle After Another, Mickey 17 tries to riff on the state of the country right now, and it makes no effort to hide its politics. There's even Mark Ruffalo basically playing a parody of a certain very loud, very orange political figure. And Bong Joon-ho himself said, "It seems to be a story about the future, but it's actually a portrait of us now and the reality around us." People liked the commentary, but nobody wanted to actually go out and watch it in theaters. Bong was coming off Parasite, a movie that made $258 million on an $11.5 million budget. But of course, no one expected Mickey 17 to match that. This one's based on a pretty weird, niche sci-fi novel, and the budget was $118 million. So to break even, they needed almost $300 million. How Warner Brothers didn't see this coming, who knows? Sci-fi is always a gamble unless you've got a broad, easy marketing hook like Gravity or Interstellar. Mickey 17 is more of a black comedy, and the marketing just didn't do a great job selling it. Reviews were decent, but not amazing, and it wound up with just $133 million worldwide. The Unbreakable Boy was dead on arrival, and you could see it coming. Zachary Levi is pretty much canceled at this point. People haven't forgotten his public support for Trump, so Hollywood kinda blacklisted him. But honestly, that wasn't the only problem here. This movie sat on the shelf for years after being shot in late 2020. Official story is that they held the release for political timing, but whatever the reason, it didn't help. Usually, faith-based dramas have a built-in audience, but Lionsgate barely pushed this one. It got released in fewer than 2,000 theaters, almost no marketing behind it, and people just weren't aware it existed. Even with an A cinema score and 97% audience approval, there was no momentum. The combination of the delay and lack of promotion killed any chance it had. The Tron franchise always had its die-hard fans, but it's never broken out of that cult bubble. Tron Legacy in 2010 pulled in about $50 million domestic on a $170 million budget. That's a long way from a hit, but somehow Disney decided to pour $220 million into this third one. And then they added Jared Leto as the lead, which didn't do the film any favors. He's a polarizing choice if there ever was one. The marketing didn't help at all, didn't make it feel like a must-see, and reviews were mixed, so no one outside the hardcore Tron crowd turned out. It ended up making just $142 million worldwide, which is catastrophic on a budget that size. Disney is looking at a loss of at least $132 million here. They had 15 years between sequels, never built any real momentum after Legacy, and let the whole thing go cold. Everyone could see this bomb coming, but I don't think anybody thought it would be quite this bad. Jeff Bridges is still out there hoping it'll have some kind of Heaven's Gate comeback years from now, where a flop gets reappraised as a masterpiece. But even he doesn't sound too sure. The funny thing about the Accountant franchise is that the first movie was never supposed to blow up the way it did. Back in 2016, you had Ben Affleck playing this number-savvy killer, and somehow that oddly specific pitch turned into a $155 million box office win on a $44 million budget. A sequel felt inevitable, but they waited too long and Hollywood changed. COVID wiped out the audience that used to show up for mid-budget thrillers aimed at grown-ups. So when The Accountant 2 finally arrived almost 10 years later, it was working uphill from day one. The budget nearly doubled to around $80 million. Dumb decision already, considering the kind of movies that are struggling now. The sequel pulled in $103.2 million worldwide. Not a complete disaster, but nowhere near enough to justify the spending. But this is a rare case where it doesn't really matter. Amazon backed this thing, and they treated theaters like a commercial for Prime Video. Kinda like Tron was for Disneyland rides. Once the movie landed on streaming, it pulled in 80 million viewers in a month. And that was the real payday. Whether the movie wins or loses money in theaters almost doesn't matter. Amazon wants eyeballs, subscriptions, and attention. Theatrical box office was just step one. Remember when the Coen brothers used to make movies that got people out to theaters? That era feels like ancient history. Honey Don't is Ethan Coen doing another solo project with his wife. And this one somehow got a $20 million budget, even after Drive Away Dolls bombed just last year. There's Aubrey Plaza, Margaret Qualley, and Chris Evans in the cast. Still, the movie never stood a chance. From the jump, Honey Don't was fighting uphill. The Cannes premiere left critics cold, and the mixed reviews just hung around for months. By the time it opened wide, nobody cared. It could barely scrape together $6.7 million at the box office. That's less than Dolls did, and that one was already a flop. The movie tries for a messy neo-noir about a private investigator tangled up with a cult led by Evans, and Plaza as a mystery woman. But for all its style, it just doesn't work. Critics hammered it, 46% on Rotten Tomatoes, and audiences liked it even less. This is supposed to be the second part of a trilogy, but at this point I don't know who's actually funding part 3. Black Bag is the kind of film Hollywood claims people want. Grown-up thriller, smart script, no superheroes or some multiverse nonsense, and yet when it shows up, nobody leaves their house to watch it. Steven Soderbergh directed this one, and the cast is full of big names like Cate Blanchett, Michael Fassbender, and Pierce Brosnan. That lineup alone should sell tickets. Instead, it barely made a sound. Problem is, the movie cost $60 million. That's a massive number for something that mostly takes place in a handful of locations and wraps up in under 100 minutes. On top of that, Focus Features barely marketed it. You can't convince people to show up if they don't even know the movie exists. Critics were into it. Some said it's one of Soderbergh's tightest works in years, but reviews don't help much anymore. Black Bag crawled to $43.4 million worldwide, and then they just dumped it to streaming. Pixar's dominance at the box office isn't what it used to be, and that became clear again this year. Inside Out 2 was a monster hit, but that was a sequel. Basically, they were just playing it safe with characters everyone already knows. When Pixar puts out something new, the picture changes. Elio had everything riding against it. The budget was massive, anywhere from $150 to $200 million, depending on who you ask. That meant Pixar needed Elio to pull in at least $375 million just to cover costs, but the movie topped out at $154. You look at the numbers and it's pretty much a disaster, especially for a non-pandemic release. One big problem: Elio never felt like an event. The marketing didn't get people excited about the story or the characters. It just came across like another generic animated movie you could wait to watch at home. And that's what a lot of people did. Romantic movies have had a rough time at the box office lately, and A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey is a perfect example. Even with big names like Colin Farrell and Margot Robbie, people weren't buying tickets. The film tried to blend romance with fantasy, set up as a kind of road movie, but from the start it was a hard sell. Director Kogonada has a reputation for visually striking films that don't always connect with mainstream audiences. His last two movies bombed, and this one followed the same path. Test screenings didn't go well, and you could feel the lack of confidence. The marketing was basically non-existent, just enough to say the movie was coming out. The budget was $45 million, but the final box office was only $20. That's not even close. The takeaway here is that right now, most people aren't leaving home for a romance, no matter how big the stars are. Wes Anderson is one of the few directors in Hollywood who lives in a completely different financial reality than everybody else. Most filmmakers need studios, investors, test screenings, and market projections. Anderson has billionaire Stephen Rails and his checkbook. If Wes wants to make a movie about pink trains on Mars narrated by a taxidermied fox, Rails pays for it, no questions asked. That system works beautifully until the audience decides they don't care anymore. And that's basically what happened with the Phoenician Scheme. On paper, this looked like another Wes Anderson-shaped chapter in his cinematic dollhouse. Quirky cast, handcrafted visuals, pastel colors, symmetrical shots. But this time, it didn't work. There's this growing sentiment that Anderson's style is now Anderson parodying himself. The novelty just isn't there anymore. When the Grand Budapest Hotel came out, it felt exciting. The Phoenician Scheme feels like a TikTok filter of a Wes Anderson movie. The results speak for themselves, about $40 million worldwide on a $30 million budget. Anderson's weakest showing since the Darjeeling Limited back in 2007. Here's a movie that honestly looked like it had everything lined up. Lee Wannell directing after The Invisible Man, so people were paying attention. The budget was only $25 million, so Universal probably thought this was a safe bet. Instead, what happened was a masterclass in how to lose momentum before you even open. The design of the Wolfman itself started a whole online backlash before anyone even saw the film. Suddenly, Universal is on defense, scrambling to fix the messaging. The studio went so far as to spoil the actual transformation scene in their own marketing, just handed it over in a promo clip. They dropped the movie in January, which is basically a graveyard slot, and then reviews landed 2 days before release, and they weren't kind. In the end, Wolfman barely made $35 million total. It was such a flop that even Jason Blum, who produced it, went on Twitter and basically said, "Yeah, we blew it." Hurry Up Tomorrow is a perfect example that big names mean nothing if the movie isn't there. This was sold as a psychological thriller with Jenna Ortega and The Weeknd in the lead. Should be an easy sell, right? Except The Weeknd was already coming off the disaster that was The Idol on HBO, and this movie just added to all the hate. The marketing was a mess. They never really made it clear what kind of movie people were supposed to expect. Then, with reviews embargoed until the very last minute, the writing was on the wall. Critics ripped it apart. Even with a modest $15 million budget, the box office only hit $7.8 million. Once opening weekend was done, the word of mouth was so bad it basically erased the movie from existence. George Martin's name used to mean something, but the Game of Thrones finale kind of burned all that goodwill. In the Lost Lands, couldn't lean on Martin's reputation to get people in seats. It's a $55 million fantasy film from Paul W.S. Anderson, the guy who usually only hits with video game adaptations. The trailer did the movie no favors, and the cast, Mila Jovovich and Dave Bautista, just aren't the sort of names that guarantee box office anymore. It barely got marketed and ended up getting dumped into U.S. theaters without much noise. Negative reviews hit right away, and that was it. Total box office was just $6.2 million, which is a disaster for a movie this size. It's hard to imagine Anderson getting budgets like this again anytime soon after a flop this big. Ari Aster went from indie horror golden boy to the guy audiences avoid like a bad memory. Hereditary and Midsommar made A24 look like the smartest studio on Earth. 2 cultural earthquakes in a row. Then he released Beau is Afraid, and suddenly it felt like way too much weird. But instead of regrouping, Aster just doubled down with Eddington. Depending on who you asked, it was either a bold commentary on the COVID era or a cinematic dare. Bet you won't sit through this. Most people took that dare and walked away. The casting suggested a major event. Joaquin Phoenix, Pedro Pascal, Emma Stone, Austin Butler, that's an Avengers-level lineup. But you can stack 10 Oscar winners on top of each other, and it won't matter if the audience wants to run for the exit the moment the lights go down. The box office shows exactly that. $12.7 million total on a $25 million budget. The Alto Knights was supposed to be Barry Levinson's return to big studio filmmaking. You've got De Niro starring as 2 different real-life crime bosses, childhood friends who both became major mobsters. There was a time when having De Niro in your movie guaranteed it wouldn't flop. Not anymore. Alto Knights earned just $6 million at the domestic box office and only $10.2 million worldwide. That's one of the worst starts for a big studio release in years. Warner Brothers CEO David Zaslav pushed this through with a $45 million budget and a theatrical release. But even at the time, people inside the studio thought it was risky. It really looked like a film better suited for streaming. Irwin Winkler, who produced the movie, is still defending it. He compared Alto Knights to Goodfellas, saying, "Over the years, I'm sure that Warner's will make some money on it. We never did big theatrical business with Goodfellas, but we certainly did in home entertainment. I think that in the long run, the Alto Knights will have the same kind of long-range audience acceptance." The Life of Chuck could have been one of the year's big breakout movies. After all, Mike Flanagan directed, it won the Audience Award at Toronto Film Festival, and the buzz was there. But for reasons only Neon understands, they held it back for 9 months. By the time they finally put it in theaters, nobody cared anymore. The title doesn't tell you anything, and the marketing didn't help. Most people didn't even know what kind of movie it was supposed to be. Instead of riding the momentum from its festival win, Neon just quietly released it into 1,000 theaters. Box office ended up at $16.2 million. They never shared the budget, but there's no way it made a profit. Honestly, if they'd put it out sooner while people still remembered Toronto Win, it might have found an audience, or at least some awards traction. Instead, it's just another flop people already forgot about. And at this point, it's not even in the awards conversation. Ke Huy Quan's comeback has been one of the best stories in Hollywood. He went from The Goonies to years behind the scenes to finally winning an Oscar. Everybody wanted to see him get a real shot as a leading man, and Universal gave him that shot with Love Hurts, an action comedy that was supposed to feel like classic popcorn fun. This is Quan's first lead since the Oscar, and he actually took Spielberg's advice and dove back into action roles. But that's where the good news ends. Love Hurts was handed an $18 million budget, aimed straight at Valentine's, and Universal seemed to set it up for success, on paper. But in reality, the trailer fell flat, marketing was minimal, and when the review embargo finally lifted just before release, critics destroyed it. Rotten Tomatoes ended up at 19%. That's about as bad as it gets. The movie managed $17.5 million at the box office, not even making its budget back. 2 weekends, and it was gone. After all the goodwill from his Oscar win, Quan deserved a real shot, and this just wasn't it. Lionsgate keeps trying to expand the John Wick universe, but Keanu Reeves is still the main event, no matter how you cut it. For Ballerina, Ana de Armas was front and center. But even with all the marketing hyping Keanu's supporting appearance, it wasn't enough. Ballerina had a $90 million budget, just $10 million less than John Wick 4. And yet it looked like it was made for streaming, generic action, nothing close to the Wick standard. There were reports of major reshoots, which never helps, and the final result had that perfect for streaming energy. It ended up making $137.2 million, which is less than every mainline Wick film except the very first one, and that one only cost $30 million. When you factor in marketing, it's definitely a box office bomb. Not exactly what Lionsgate wanted, especially after 7 flops in a row last year. You'd expect a horror movie with Al Pacino and Dan Stevens as priests would have at least some shot at finding an audience. On paper, The Ritual checked all the usual boxes: possession story, big names, the kind of genre that almost always earns back its money. But this thing was buried from day one. Distributor put up no marketing, barely even bothered with critic screenings, and just sent it out to die. It's not a surprise how it turned out. The reviews were brutal, audiences were even less forgiving, and even the people who usually show up for any possession movie just stayed away. There's no official budget, but with that cast, this wasn't some low-budget gamble. It was meant to be a real theatrical release. Instead, it crawled to just $5.7 million at the box office. No way this one ever made back its investment.